So thank you, I think. Don't believe everything you hear. I'm actually a true believer in the generally positive, beneficial side of the microbial world. So if you come away from this feeling that perhaps it's all about doom and gloom, I'd be happy to, in a different venue, tell you about why that isn't necessarily true. But nonetheless, everything always has two sides, and that's part of the dilemma in what is going on now in the life sciences. Many of you may be actively involved in the life sciences, and so for you, this will be something that's quite familiar or even old hat. But I just wanted to start by reminding you, or perhaps letting some others of you know, that we're in the middle of a revolution. And it's a revolution that concerns the life sciences, and it's a revolution in the life sciences with respect to both capability and also insight and understanding. Some have said that this 21st century is the century of biology, the last century being the century of physics, for example. So I thought I'd start with a little bit of history, and I'll just tell you now that where I'd like this to all end is in a series of questions that are difficult. They're questions for which I don't have answers. You all have probably equally interesting or important perspectives on the questions I'd like to leave you with at the end of this talk. This story begins about 50 years ago, but it's really been ramping up and escalating in tempo in just the last 10 and 20 years. And I'll tell you more about that most recent history. But remember that we didn't even know what DNA was until the 1950s. And it wasn't even all that long after the discovery of DNA that there was the first biotech company dedicated to the manipulation of DNA. That's Genentech, which is just right up the road here in South San Francisco. And then it was only really just 20 years before one became 1,200. And today, the number of biotech companies, I couldn't get a good number, but right now I can tell you that biotechnology accounts for about 2% of the US gross domestic product. It's a significant, although minor, fraction of our economy, but it's growing faster than most other sectors. There are lots of ways of looking at growth from a technical point of view. Sometimes people in biology say, oh, let's look at how quickly and efficiently we can read DNA and write DNA. Write means synthesize DNA. These are things that literally 40 years ago were impossible. Today, they're routine. And these are plots on a log scale. So these are changes that are happening in an exponential fashion, both the increase in the ability to make DNA, the decrease in the cost of doing so, and then likewise the increase in the ability to sequence or read DNA and the cost associated with that. Now, these trends don't necessarily suggest, or I don't mean to imply that it means that we're also good at insight. So I was just saying that we're not quite as good at gleaning new insights from all this information, but information is the first step. So this is still a significant kind of trend. And when you think about what it is that we and all of the folks that are working in biology are trying to do and are now able to do, it's sometimes useful to try to put it into categories. And so I'll just summarize this very quickly by saying, what is it we can do now? We can generate novel diversity that doesn't exist, as best we know, doesn't exist in nature. We can direct the design of a new biological entity, like a virus especially, but a cell as well. And we can base that on something that we know exists in nature, so we can recreate things in nature. We can also create something of a deliberate sort that is non-natural. Some of you may have seen the cover of the New York Times Magazine this last Sunday. It's about de-extinction. Did you see the story about bringing back the woolly mammoth and the carrier pigeon? So this is all about recovering the DNA and reconstructing the DNA sequence of these extinct species, and then rebuilding them from the genome up. That's literally not fantasy right now. And it's actual practice for viruses. Bless you. The last two things here are simply the increasing ability to understand how complex biological systems work, like the human body. And then finally, it's the packaging, it's the technology stuff. It's making things, packaging them. For example, gene therapy, gene delivery. That's something that's been going gangbusters in the last several years. And it's all being done now increasingly with really efficient commercial kits. Things that I did in my training that took me a couple years to construct are now things that you can buy a kit to do and execute in several weeks. It's really a different landscape right now. So that's all about technical capabilities.